how's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the Daily No Code Brief, where we're teaching you about all the things of no code that no code has to offer and how we can help you utilize the tools such as AppSheet, Bubble, anything that you're interested in learning in no code. We are here to help you. So like I said, I'm Austin from AppSheet Training, which AppSheet Training is powered by QREW Technologies. You might have seen our brand around a bit. And so the Daily No Code Brief is brought to you by QREW Technologies. And today we're talking about data validity and data constraints. So excited to hop into this session with you guys today. If you're new to the Daily No Code Brief, what we do on these is we open up live chat with you guys. And so if you have questions about the topic or anything else related to the AppSheet apps that y'all are working on, feel free to post those in the chat and I can answer those live on the call with you today. So like I said, we're talking about data validation today and going to be going back into our expense tracking app and looking at ways to optimize our forms. So that we can add like some dependent drop downs and different data validations and constraints on like values within there to really ensure data accuracy and make sure that all of the app and data continuity is there from beginning to end. So that way data is loaded in an accurate way for the end users and for people that are like visualizing that data to be able to make business decisions long term. Because reliable data is great, so that way you can make those informed decisions. Because if you're just inputting data and it's kind of messy, then the business decisions that you're going to make may not be as reliable as you think they are. So we want to make sure that we're controlling all of that in the front end with the design of the app and making sure that the data coming in is accurate, so that way that the data going out, whether that's visualizations, can inform logical business insights there. All right, so how's it going, Edwin? In Spanish? Very great. I know a little bit of Spanish, not too much, but más o menos is what I usually say. Sweet. So like I said, today, if you're hopping on for the first time and you're kind of new to these sessions, we've been building an expense tracker app, which is just tracking expenses based on a project. And so today we're going to look at diving into that app a little bit more and optimizing. So this week is all about optimization, making sure that our app is kind of curated for the specific design requirements for the end users. So it should spur on some ideas on how you can optimize your AppSheet apps. And like I said, this is a live Q&A format. So if you have specific questions, please feel free to leave those in the chat and we'll get those answered for you today. All right. Well, I am excited to get into this session. So I think that's all we need for an intro. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'll see you guys on the other side. All right. Well, again, welcome to the Daily No Code Brief. Like I said, my name is Austin from AppSheet Training, and today we're talking about ensuring data integrity. All right, so let's do a little bit of a review of what we're going to be talking about today. And just by way of reminder, again, this is a live Q&A session where we are opening up questions for you guys. If y'all have specific questions about the apps that y'all are working on, feel free to leave those in the chat and we can go ahead and answer those for you live on the call. All right, so the framework that we're using as we're thinking about the apps that we need to be building is the Citizen Developer Framework. And so we're going to discover, organize, design, iterate, deploy, and repeat. And so this is just kind of our framework that we're using as we're thinking about the business goals and what the overall business objective is. So we're going to discover all of the workflows that are currently in motion, whether there's paper processes, spreadsheet processes, or just like ideas of processes that need to be established that haven't been implemented in any sort of like systematic fashion. We're going to lay all of those out. So write them all down, whiteboard, however you want to gather that information. Once you have all that, pick one and then go ahead and organize the data structure for that. Once you have that organized and ready to go, then you can start designing the app. That's simply by connecting it to AppSheet, or if you're designing in another no-code tool, you'll go ahead and connect it to that no-code builder. And then once you have gotten it connected, then you can start customizing the UX features and just like the user flows and everything there. And then after that, you can just go ahead and start iterating different versions of the app. So you're going to deploy it to your end users, get them to test it, get them to use it, and get real-time feedback so that way you can continue the process of improvement of making the app work for who will actually be using the app. And that's kind of like the benefit of going with no code rather than like a traditional um, um, a traditional application cycle, right? And those are going to be long and drawn out. You have specific requirements, and you'll probably be building for a year to 2 or 3 years until you can actually get um, any workable usability out of the application. And so with no code, you can build an app at that day and go ahead and start iterating on the design and using it with your employees or with your coworkers, right? So it's really fast. It's essentially just like you have an idea, then okay, let's use AppSheet to test it out and start improving the business process. You start thinking about business processes in terms of how can I relate this to AppSheet rather than okay, I need to write this thing down and do X, Y, and Z. Right, you start using AppSheet as a way to communicate business problems and find solutions for them with AppSheet. All right, so what are those steps that we're going to talk about today? So today's purpose is to really understand how we can create data validation inside of our apps. So we're going to look at the expense tracker app again. So we'll open that app up. We'll select a column to validate, add the validation rule. We'll write the validation formula, and then we'll test and refine that. So depending on how the usability is when you're testing it with your coworkers or whoever you're deploying the app out to, that's going to create different changes to the validation rules. So today, let's just go ahead and hop into our app and start testing the different validation features of AppSheet. All right, so let me hop over here into our expense tracker app or tracking app. And then just by way of reminder, if you're new to these sessions, we are working on the expense tracker app, as you can see here. And it has a project view and an expense tracker view. We changed yesterday. The expense tracker view is just a read-only state. And so all we can do on this one is just look at the data. We're not allowed to add any data to it unless we're adding receipts, which you can add a receipt there. But this is just to view the expenses for all of the projects. And so if we go over to the project level view, though, we can add more projects. And so we have like a sales project, a marketing project, and an operations project. If we click on the sales project here, we can see the name. And then we can see these are default categories that we established in an earlier session to help with like initial values on the expense tracker table. And then down here, we have the department is for the sales department. And then here, yesterday, we cleaned up the budget overview section. So we kind of combined a bunch of columns into one using HTML. Which you're able to do that within AppSheet on detail views. And then you can see all of these columns listed here, and it's dynamic based on the table that you're using. All right, so there's that run through. And then last but not least, here's our expenses where we can, now we cannot add expenses over here because we changed that to a view only, so you can see the view. So that's one thing that we're going to have to fix today as well. I also wanted to mention I have made this a part of our like app portfolio. So if you want access to this app, you can head over to our AppSheet portfolio, which I believe is in the description below. If it's not, I'll update it after the call. And then, yeah, y'all can have access to this app and kind of explore and use it for your own use case if you find it useful. All right, so let's get into data validation and improving the usability of this application. So like I said, the first thing I want to do is come back over here to our expense table, and we're going to change this to adds, updates, and deletes again. And before we save it, let's go ahead and view the expense table. And we're going to go over to the expenses, or rather, we're going to go to the actions. And then find the expense table here. And so let's see here. We're gonna go ahead and need to press the save button so that the add action comes back for us. Okay, so then we can click on the add. And then for this one, I only want it to display if it's on this one, on this view. I don't want it to display on the expense tracker view like it's showing right here. So what I can do is I've gone to the actions that are listed under the expense and say only if this condition is true. So I can click there to open up the expression editor. All right. And then from here, I'm going to go ahead and add a context and view type again. And this is going to allow me to hide this. I'm actually going to use view for this situation. And I'm going to call the view does not equal expense tracker. Okay, so if it equals, if it doesn't equal this, then it can show the add button. But if it does, then I don't want it to show it. All right, so we'll save that there. And that should get rid of the add button in our expense tracker view, but still allow us to see it over here in our project level view. So there we go. All right, that's the behavior that I want. So I don't want people being able to add expenses here, but I do want them to have the ability to add expenses from here. Okay, because then it's going to do all of our initial values correctly and get all of that stuff sorted as we need it to. All right, so now let's get into how we can add some data validation to this. And so the best way to do this is to go through and look at the form and see like what do we need to do to make this form more user-friendly for our end users, right? Which the one that we haven't spent too much time on is our receipts form. So let's go ahead and look at a receipt. And so I'm going to go back one, and I'm going to add a new receipt to this new expense, okay? So if I come here, I can add a new receipt, and this one's going to need the expense ID, the receipt name, a description, and then we need to do the same thing there for the context view type. And I'm going to change my email down here so that it's not giving me that yellow triangle. All right. And let me back out of this form again. And it looks like the receipt tracker doesn't have any constraint values that will be necessary. So just real quick for some form cleanup, we'll do the same thing of adding that context view type over here so we don't see it in the form view. context view type. And again, if you guys have any questions as I'm building this app out, please leave them in the comments, and I'll be sure to answer those. All right. So let's see. All right. How's it going? Yeah. Thanks for joining the live stream today. And then let me go ahead and do this one. And should be good there for that one. Okay, so we saved that one. And then let's see if that makes the form look a little bit better. Okay, great. So we got the expense ID up at the top, and then we'll just list our receipt and the description. It would be nice to have like an image column, so that way we can like upload an image, but that's not the purpose of this webinar. So I'll stick to the script and make sure that you guys are getting the data validation stuff here. Okay, so there's quite a bit of drop-down menus here that we can add some data validation to make it dependent upon a selection above, right? So for example, if we clear this one and clear this one, and we select office supplies, for example, we may want to have like office supplies dependent on the vendor we select, or vice versa. The category that we select filters what vendor is available to be shown. So right now, like all vendors are shown based on this category column, but we only need to see like this one, and that's probably it, right? For office supplies. And then based off our vendor, maybe this vendor only pays in with credit card. And so we can assign that vendor have only credit cards. Okay, so how are we going to go about doing that? So the first step is we actually have to go back to the data structure and restructure that a little bit to allow for this new change. Okay, so we're at the project level. We do have a category for the vendor. We also, or a drop down for the category, a drop down for the vendor. So that's great. We can leave that as is. And then we were actually on the expense table. And so we had the project selected for us automatically. And then we have the category. We had this like, this just reference text here, so we could see like how the ID relates to the specific name. So this is like your foreign key plus your label. In AppSheet, it will already display that, but if you wanted to look at the sheet, you could see the difference there. Okay, so if we want to have a vendor be selected based on the category, then we have to assign vendors categories. And so if we're over here on the category, we can see here's the IDs, right? And so we're going to need to put a foreign key right here of the category that each vendor has. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in as the category ID. And let's see if it's a one-to-one thing. I believe it should be. So I'm going to select all the foreign keys here and go ahead and paste them in here. And so now each of these categories are assigned to a specific vendor. And so I should have access now to be able to do a dependent dropdown based on the category I select. And I'll show you guys how to do that in just a minute. And then the next dependency that we need is based on the vendor we select. It also makes a drop down dependent on the payment method. And so specific vendors might get specific payment methods. Before we go too far down that path, let's just go ahead and regenerate our structure for the category ID so that we can do the dependent drop down for the vendor name. So I'm going to hop back over here and then go to my, let's see, what table was that? Vendor table. And I'm going to regenerate the structure there. That should be good for that one. And we want to make this a type ref. So I'm going to select ref, and it's a reference. It's the category ID, so it's a reference to the category table. And I believe that should be good, just like that. And we'll go ahead and save that one. Okay. And so if I did this correct, we should be set up for success now. And let me double check my category table. So we have related vendors. Okay. I believe that's what we're looking for there. And so now I'm just double checking like how my table's relating to each other right now, right? So I'm like, I created a foreign key in our vendor table here, which then AppSheet automatically creates a list of related vendors for us. And so that's the list that I'm going to use to make my dependencies upon over here for this drop-down menu. So based on the category I select, it's going to dependently align categories that are connected to the related vendors. And it's pretty straightforward from this point. So we just go to our project table, or rather our expense table, and we select our vendor drop-down menu or reference field. And then we're going to go to data validity. Once we're on data validity, we're going to go ahead and open up this expression formula here. You can head over to the Data Explorer and you can select category ID. And then we're going to get those related fields there. So related vendors is what we're looking for. So this is saying, based on the value of the category ID, I want you to select only or show only the list of the related vendors there. So let's go ahead and save that one, and then we'll test this feature to see if it's working properly. All right. Okay, so for this demonstration, you can go ahead and clear out these just so y'all can see it work. I think I already got confirmation that it's working there. So let's go ahead and select a category. So if we select office supplies, we've got the description there, and then the vendor drop down, perfect. So you can see we can select the vendor based off of the category that we're choosing. If we go to travel, it's going to clear that for us. You can't select that vendor for travel. You can only select Travel Co. Perfect. So you can see how that can really like clean up your data a lot, right? So if you don't want users to select certain values, you just don't allow them to. You use data validation to update those for them, so that way they have to select a new value for that. All right, so that is one version of data validation. There's another one I wanted to show y'all for just amounts. This is more of like a data constraint, right? So if you don't want them to spend over a certain amount, you can have that data constraint in there. So we're going to have a constraint of 0 and a maximum value of like 100, and then a minimum value of 0. So if they overspend on this, then it won't let them log that. And so maybe there's a process in place where like, hey, you have to go and get something that's within budget, or it triggers like a workflow approval, or like they have to get more approvals for that. So this is a type of data constraint right here, just setting the parameters for the amounts that people can input there. Another way I've seen this is like if, or another way that this is also done is like if you have a number value rather than a decimal, it will also give you like an error message. And so that'll bring us to like, what do you want to show up on the error message? So if I put 120, it says this entry is invalid, right? And so you can actually control this, this error message right here. And so we can open up the column editor again, and we can go ahead and open up our, let's see here. Invalid value error. So this is the error message when the value is not valid. And so we can control that parameter right there. It's a text value that's going to populate. And so we can just write, we can say expenses should be within 100 US dollars. Okay. So if we wanted to have a dynamic value here, we could do that with a column and then use some like concatenation to combine that. But for this demonstration, we're just showing that this is where the error message is found. And you can change that value using that formula right there. And so we'll go ahead and save that, and we'll populate the error message to say that instead. And so that way users aren't like, well, what am I supposed to put here? If it's invalid is a little bit vague. And so if we do that, then it populates this one, expenses should be within 100 US dollars. Perfect. So now users know, okay, I need to either go back and change that, update my order, and make sure that I'm within that allotted budget. And so then removes the error message, got the correct amount in there. And then we can continue moving on with the expense tracker. So really cleaning up, making sure that the information that's going into your application is structured and data-driven, and it's accurate. All right. So there is that one that we have there for data validation, and making sure that we've got the dependent dropdown set up. Okay, so what if we wanted to do the next layer? So I also talked about, okay, now we want to select the payments for each of the vendors, right? So there should be like a default payment. So we kind of set that up in our last week's session. So I'll kind of go over that again with this type value, and we set other, default, and other. So this is one way to validate data or set default parameters within the input fields. And another way is like we're doing right now through data validation. And so we can add the payment method for each vendor as well. And so we can add another column here, and kind of the same structure. We're just going to add payment method ID. And we're going to add the foreign keys of how each of these vendors are going to accept payment. And so we'll just highlight those and put them in there like so, and add one more right there. Okay, so now each vendor has a specific type of payment that they're going to accept. And this could be helpful for like planning if you're, for example, going to the catering or marketing solutions, like you know how you're supposed to pay for these things. So that could be an added bonus feature of this application. So if I click on a project, and this is also going to help us like not have to depend so heavily on these default categories anymore, because we have data validation rules set in place. And so instead of needing these columns, which I'm going to go ahead and clear, for project A, we don't need to set those anymore. We're going to use data validation instead. I'm going to add a new one, and then I'm going to give them the option. Okay, what did you do? You needed to spend money on office supplies. Okay, great. What'd you buy? Write that description there. Since you selected office supplies, it's already got it pre-selected with the credit card based off of our, let's see, I think it's this field right here. So where is that payment method? Might not be on the right table. Expense table. I'm on the right table. Okay, so where's payment method? Right here. Okay, so it auto-filled it, and okay, so here's our like default value expression that we used in our last session. So the any select payment method ID type equals default. And so instead of doing that, we're actually going to go ahead and use the data validation method instead of having these types of initial values here that can get a little bit confusing for end users. So this can be potentially more of a reliable way to set these up. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this one, save it. And then this one as well, since we are using data validation for that one. And so this payment method can be cleared. And so the users should be able to walk through this form by selecting the category and then writing their description of what they purchased, selecting their vendor, and then from there, it should filter this list of what types of payment they would like to make. So again, we're going to use our same method, which let's make sure our payment method we need to regenerate the structure. So that way we can have the new, rather, not the payment method, sorry. The expense table, well, the vendor table, that's the one that we need. We're going to regenerate the vendor table. I was getting my tables mixed up for a second, so that way we can add this category ID. Or, I'm sorry, guys, the payment method ID. And so we'll go ahead and add that as a reference right there. And then we're going to the payment method table. And so I'll add that and go ahead and click Save. Okay. So as that is syncing, I should have our payment method now tied to a vendor. And so now we have a list in our payment methods that ties related vendors. Okay, so we can use that same logic here for the data validation for our payment method column right here. And so I'm going to go ahead and select it, open it up with the edit pencil, click data validity, and then using our, it's going to be our vendor table this time, or let's see, where is it at? It's our, I have to go back and look because now I forgot. So if I'm selecting a vendor, I'm going into the category ID dot vendors. And so this one, I'm going into the, this one I'm going, let's see here. I think I'm confusing myself a little bit here. So let me back up and look at what we're doing. So we select a category, and then that category creates a drop down for our vendors. And so our vendors we need to go to vendor ID to create a drop down for this one. And so vendors should have a list of related payment methods. If I'm not mistaken, payment methods have related vendors. Okay. So I think we did this one backwards. We need to have vendors on the payment method. Let me, I think I might be confusing myself a little bit here. So on our vendor table, expense table, open up this one, and let's go ahead and do the valid if here. And we're going to go from the vendor ID, and we have related expenses. You do have payment method ID. Let's see if that gets us what we want. Okay, we'll save it like that. Mark it as done. Okay, that's what I thought. It's going to give us the error. It says this is an invalid validation. So let's take a look at that error message here. Dig in a little bit deeper. So it is a valid expression, but it needs to be like a list of items. And right now, this is just returning a reference of items. So I could wrap it in a list, but I think this is just a workaround. I don't think this is going to be the solution here. And so I'm going to save that like so. But we'll see if it gets the job done. So we got our category, and we select meals. And so that gives us the option to select gourmet catering. And then if we select that, then you can see here, we have the broken reference here with the triangle. Okay, so like I said, I think I did this backwards. We need to go ahead and hop back to the data structure. We need to put the vendor. We need to have, if we select a vendor, then they should have related payment method. Is because we put the category ID here on this one, and we went category ID dot related vendor. And so for a payment method, we need to have a vendor has a related payment method. Right. Okay. So this needs to be taken out, and a vendor will have a related payment method over here. And so what we'll do for that is we'll actually make, this one is actually going to be set up a little bit different because it's going to be a list of vendors here, right? And so this is going to be an enum list of the vendors that we can select. So you'll get to see like a little bit of a different version of this data validation. So if I come back over here, I'm going to select the vendor IDs that I want to be for credit cards, and come back over to the payment methods, paste those over here. So I actually want to create a list of these. So we'll get those in there. And I'm going to separate them with commas. And then same thing for these next ones. We'll select 2 and paste those in here. And then last ones is we'll get these right here and go ahead and paste them in there like so. All right. Okay, so now that we have those, we can come back over to our app where we're gonna get an error message real quick. So regenerate our expense table as well as our payment method table. Regenerate that one because we added a new column over here and took out the other one. So gonna switch my screens here. Okay, so we have the vendor ID, and it's going to be an enum list with a base type of ref. So we select ref, and then it's referencing the vendor table, which you can see right there. Okay, and so that's going to give us the list of vendor IDs that are related to a specific payment method. Okay. And so if we come back to our form here, we can save that, and that will update accordingly. And so now we can go into our valid if, and we can say, okay, when we select a vendor on this expense table, we're needing to create the dropdown for the payment method, the dependent dropdown. And so select payment method ID and date of validity. And now we can say when we select the vendor, when we select the vendor ID, okay, when we select the vendor ID, I don't believe we have a payment method ID anymore in this vendor table. Vendor table. It is still saying we have the payment method ID, but I don't believe that's accurate. Yeah, the vendor table no longer has a payment method ID. We have a vendor ID over here in payment method. Okay. So a couple more things to update here. Let's just go ahead and take that formula out. All right. So I got the category, office supplies, vendor, XYZ office, and then the payment method. We haven't validated it yet. So let's go back to the drawing board here. Over here to our expense tracker data structure. Okay, so if we need related vendors on this table, maybe we did have it right on the first one. Do some Control Z here. I think we might have had it right. Okay, we have payment methods over here that are related. Then when I select a vendor, I should get their related expenses. When I select a category, it logs that. When I select a vendor, it logs this. And then I should be able to make a selection of that one. Okay. Let's try this again. And I'll do a review of everything once we get this validated. But just trying to go through and do some debugging, make sure everything is structured as I intend it to. And so back to the vendor table, let me regenerate. Okay, so we have the payment method ID there, which is what we want on the payment table, on the vendor table. And then back to our expenses, payment method ID, and date of validity. So I'm going to need to go into when a vendor is selected, I should have Okay. I'm in a category, just want to check something. Category dot, we have related vendors on the category table. Okay. And so if I'm going to, so I need to do payment method ID. Which dot related vendors. So there's my list, but I don't think this is going to validate because we haven't selected anything here. But let's test it. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I forgot to switch my screen right here. All right. So back over on AppSheet and selecting my category and then vendor and payment method. Yep. So we're getting nothing there because no vendor has been selected with a specific payment method on that end. And so I'm going to clear that out. Okay, I have a bit more time to troubleshoot this. And so what I actually think we need to do is we might need to try a select expression that looks at the vendor ID where let's see, where the payment method ID equals this rows. Let's see if this works. Select vendor IDs where the payment method ID equals this rows dot vendor ID. There we go. That should be our validation right there. So listing all of the vendors where the payment method ID on the vendor table equals this row's vendor ID. So that's what we want to select there. And I'll go ahead and save that one. And let's test our validation now. So office supplies, got our vendor, and still we do not have our payment method ID. Let me try one more thing here. We adjust this one. Might have got these flip-flopped over here and put the equal sign there and move this to the back end of the expression. Okay, so this row's vendor ID equals, oh, there's the issue there too. This row's, so this is not a true statement. It will never be true. So this row's payment method ID select the, okay, where the vendor ID you can do vendor name equals this row's vendor ID dot vendor name, and we actually want to select payment method table IDs, and I think we're going to need to adjust all of these. Where the ID is equal to this row's payment ID. Okay, so select payment method ID, where the ID of the payment row is, that's not really what we want to select. We want to select vendor. So one more time, vendor payment method ID. So we want to select vendor payment method IDs where the vendor ID is equal to this row's vendor ID. That's what we want. There we go. Okay, trying to wrap up all of the different tables and how they relate to each other. So that should get us our validation there. And this row puts you in the context one level back from where you were. So I was in the vendor table, and then I went one context back into the expense table, which is why I used the this row feature there. So that expression, and boom, we got it. So glad we have an hour here because it gives me time to test and troubleshoot as I'm doing these live with you guys. So you get to see me kind of work through the hiccups as this is a live experience. So we got it. We got it validated. So let me recap, because that was a lot of stuff that we had to do to get it to work correctly. So step one is you have to, one, ensure that you got the proper data structure right. And then once you get that established, then you can start setting up the data constraints for these validations. And I did, I wanted two dependent dropdowns, one based on the category, and then the second one based on the vendor ID. And so I was trying to validate the payment method based off the vendor ID. And so what I had to do to validate that is use a select expression right here, where I said, I want you to select the vendor, and the column in the vendors table that I want you to base this selection off of is the payment method ID column. The way you're going to validate it is I want you to look at the ID of that table, which is the vendor table. And I want you to validate that vendor ID on here with this row's. So now we're one step back. We're back into the expense table. Look at this row's vendor ID and match it with the ID in that table. And so these two have to sync up correctly. And then that's what I will show you in the drop-down menu. And so that's why we use the select expression rather than just doing the quick dereference one, because we needed to like go through all these measures. So we'll save that, save it again, and I'll test it one more time so that way y'all can see it in like the full picture. And so again, category office supplies, select our vendor, and then the payment method we can select as cash. And so now we have a logical workflow rather than it just pre-selecting everything. Our users can see like, okay, here's what I have the options to select. This can get even fancier if you wanted to like put like a yes, no validation for users of like, hey, this one doesn't have a preferred method of payment or whatever. And so you can say no and use an if expression to populate all the values rather than just one. Sweet. All right. So there's our tutorial on data validation. Let me hop back over to our slides here. And so let's just do a quick review of our steps that we went through. So we opened up the app, we selected the column. The column we kind of stuck on today was our vendor ID and our payment method ID. And we set up validation so that the form would show us which of the selected payment methods or vendors were associated with the previous selection. Um, and then once we did that, we kind of wrote and tested our data validation formula. And then we even got to see the test and refine phase there. All right, so that's kind of the workflow that we used to create those data validations. And so today's topic was data validations and constraints in AppSheet. We did some live Q&A. So thank you guys for everyone that commented in the chat. And then tomorrow we're going to talk about automation in AppSheet with bots. So if you're interested in learning about how automations work, we'll run through a few examples of what those look like. And we'll continue using the expense tracker app for that as well. Okay, so if you enjoy this content and you like the information that we're doing here, please make sure to like and subscribe. That'll help us continue growing this channel and telling more people about no code and how it can help you automate your business workflows. If you would like to, you can register for a next session at appsheettraining.com/livestream. I'm putting the slides and the apps that I'm working on those. And so when you register, you're going to get that straight to your inbox. So that's our gift to you. It's free, and I'll put those on there daily, so you can get access to that information when you would like it. And then if you want to sign up for your free AppSheet Training Tech Talk, this is where we can dive deep into your own use case. It's a one-on-one call with one of our specialists. And then we can talk with you about how our services might align with your company, and we can establish a partnership and make sure that we're helping your company grow in its understanding of no code, and utilizing these tools to the best of your ability. All right, so with that, I want to thank everyone who joined today, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Y'all have a great one. Bye.